Imagine making billion-dollar business decisions based on a tweet or worse, a meme. Welcome to the era of taco trades where tariffs flip flop overnight and executives wake up asking, what just happened? Today, we're diving deep into the volatile world of tariff uncertainty and how leaders can navigate it when the ground beneath their feet keeps moving.
Well, welcome, Cindy. Welcome back. Today, we're going to talk about my favorite food, tacos.
Taco Tuesday. I want to call this episode Taco Tuesday.
I really
So
do.
badly.
I do. We should absolutely call it Taco Tuesday and get some good guacamole and salsa. But unfortunately, that is not the taco we are talking about, right? So, taco trade, that is what we're going to be talking about today. Taco, TACO, coined by Robert Armstrong of the New York Times in a kind of tongue-in-cheek. Taco stands for Trump always chickens out. Ouch.
And I had no idea. So when you told me about this, Jamie, I went and looked at it, and nowhere did I see that it was an acronym. I only saw the stock prices, the cliff, and then it's a deep shell taco. Fall flat up. I was like, oh, that makes sense. It's a deep shell taco. That is not what they meant. Anyway.
This is so good. This is so good. So, it's really interesting. The idea being, so Trump always chickens out. What we're actually talking about is the tariffs, right? We're talking about the crazy flip-flopping that has been going on that we've already recorded one episode about already. But let's talk and go back a little bit in history and talk about what we're saying. Trump announces his first set of tariffs back in like early January or late January, early February. And it was going to go against three countries, right? Mexico, Canada, and China. He stuck through with the China one at the time, but he first announced and then backed off of quite a few of the Mexico and Canadian tariffs that he was going to impose. Then April 2nd comes and we've got Liberation Day where he announces a really long list. He had a billboard of lists of different tariffs he was going to impose on every country in the world and a few islands that were unpopulated. And what happens very quickly, about 2 weeks later, as the market completely tanks, as a result of it, he rescinds all of those, brings it down to a 10% tariff on pretty much everything. And the stock market surges and we're back to before where we were in the Liberation Day, right? So both of these were trades that suggested huge fear, market tanks, Trump reverses, market bounces. You're back to where you were. That's the taco because Trump chickens out. He cannot maintain these tariffs. And so do not worry. You're going to get your money back. Now, I want to be a little bit specific here. Taco was meant for stock market people like me. But is this also something that leaders in industry needed to be thinking about?
Absolutely. And I think also the question is, if you take that assumption, if you call it Trump always chickens out, that is actually a pretty negative view of his action. If we assume that what he's doing is he's running the country like a company, what he's doing is he's actually signaling to other corporations or competitors or whomever, right? That he means business. So he actually implements it and then he gives them a chance to come to the table, right? So I kind of see, if you're purely looking at it from an altruistic perspective, what he's trying to do from a business perspective is kind of shock the market, and it is working, but it's also, it has some consequences for us as well.
But the shocks only work if people believe that it's going
right.
to happen, right?
That's
So if
exactly
taco
right.
was really true, we have a self-fulfilling prophecy issue, right?
Yes.
So
absolutely.
this will
Well,
be really interesting. Let's dive
okay,
into it.
let's talk about, so that it's entirely possible that we will see more tariffs. We've seen a lot of them come and go, and you're a corporation trying to decide when to buy supplies. Should I buy an entire year of supplies or components now for my products that I'm making here, or do I, how do I stock the shelves this year? And so previously, before today, you might have gone out and purchased a ton of supply because you're worried about the implementation of some of these tariffs at some point. But we're seeing it implemented and pulled back. and then implemented and pulled back. So it's really tough to decide, should I be should I believe that it's going to be implemented at some point or not? What do you think is happening?
So I actually think most people are going to be pause, wait and see,
Hmm.
right? So we've got a couple of different types of decisions that have to happen around tariffs. We've got our immediate needs, our supplies for this year's product, this year's stores, etc. And then we've got our strategic decisions that we also have to make. Do we fundamentally shift our supply chains? Do we make things here in the United States? Do we make these capital investments that are happening? And that is going to be a completely different set of rules. Let's start with the short run ones. Okay. There
Okay.
seems to be kind of two different options out there. Okay. Number one, consumers. Consumers came out, and when we had the taco trade there, everybody who could afford to buy a new car seemed to have bought one back in March. We
Hmm.
saw March sales surge, and then we saw a pullback in April, even though that's when tariffs disappeared
Right.
back, right? Because people were trying to front run when the tariffs were going to come. We were buying in there. And I know of corporations who have also pre ordered quite a
Right.
bit of their inventory, especially raw material type stuff. So the steel, and we're gonna get into that a little bit later,
Yeah.
aluminum, that type of thing. They decided to stockpile before tariffs hit. Right. And
Yeah.
then see if they can last out with what they have. Because at least then they can plan. I've got a price, I've got the product, I can at least plan for the next 6 months, and then I'll figure out what to do again 6 months from now. Right.
So, and I just want to add on to that. There's an extra level of complexity here. So, number one, you assume that the companies have cash to make that purchase, and obviously they have to have a place to put it. So, they're probably increasing their storage. But also, what if they don't have the cash? Maybe they took out a loan to make that purchase because they're betting on the difference in the prices. But interest rates, they're not low,
They're
right?
not
So
low.
all of this is costing more money than previously, even if they're not getting hit by the tariff. So I see all of this, even front end loading your supplies. It's just that it's increasing prices in general. It's just a matter of how much the price increases to the company.
The other option, of course, is to wait,
Yes.
right? And then let's think about what happens that way. You can play it out pretty quickly. I
Mhm.
waited to order, I waited to see what's going on, and now I may have emptier shelves, fewer products. So what do I do? Because I've got more demand than supply because I waited. What is that going to do? That's going to also increase my prices.
Mhm.
So either way, pre-buy or wait, you can see an argument very easily of prices are going to go up because of these tariffs, even if they came and went because market risk return, right? The risk has gone up, the return has to go up on my business as a result for that risk return trade-off. That is the basis of all of finance.
Right. So help me dig into this a little bit because I'm trying to figure out all of this is being done to try to boost the American manufacturing economy, right? We are trying to regain our middle class. I absolutely get it. The problem is I don't really understand how we can sustain it with the tariffs because we're seeing negative, well, we're seeing negative consequences, but in general, we're supposed to see longer term positive consequences. So could we use steel and aluminum as an example? Because we have this example from Trump's first administration, and it had some positive effects for us.
Did it? Okay, it may have.
I
That's the problem. Everything is so complex. Okay, so you are
Yeah.
right. Back in 2017, Trump did impose some tariffs on steel for the first time in a while. And the
Mhm.
results were a bit of a stronger US steel. Okay, we
Mhm.
did see a growth in steel jobs, very small amount, but some. And US Steel did survive. And actually, if you listened to Trump the other day, he actually took credit for US Steel not shutting down because of his tariffs
Right.
when he was up there. However, the problem is the knock on effects. When you raise prices of the steel, that is going to impact all of the people who use steel, such as the US construction industry and the auto industry. And if
So
actually, oh, so go
The
ahead.
goal is though to raise the price of other people's steel so that our manufacturers buy our steel, right? I mean,
Yes.
that's the goal.
That is the
Correct.
goal. That is the goal. And it did work. It did work. But there's a couple of things that are happening here. So when the 2017 items happened, the International Trade Commission came out and said, well, yes, steel prices, the steel, US steel actually did do better and things were good and you had an economic growth out of US Steel. However, you had a $3 billion negative impact on all of these other industries inside the United States, auto, construction, because
Right.
of it. So net, the argument is that the tariffs probably actually hurt the US economy greatly. It just shifted where the gain was, right?
Now with steel, so the price of steel for companies within the U.S. went up because U.S. steel prices were higher, right? It's just the way it is. They were only buying steel from overseas because it was less expensive, right?
Yes,
They weren't doing it because they don't like Americans. They were doing it because it costs less
it
money.
costs us. Yeah.
So to get them to buy American steel, the prices have to increase. Is there so the only other way for us to get US companies to buy steel, US steel would be to subsidize the industry, right? Like it would be like farming. That would
Ooh.
be I'm
That
I'm
is
just
another way
curious
we
like
could do that, but that, of course, would come out of the taxpayer's dime.
right.
The idea of a tariff is that it's coming out of somebody else's pocket, not the US taxpayers. Well,
Got it.
and that's
S-
kind of an issue because, of course, everything gets passed down into the end user. And in the end user, if it's US based steel we're talking about, it's still going to be the US consumer who pays for it, just not to the
Yeah.
government, to a corporation or something like that. But what you're talking about is really interesting. So back in, let's see here, that would have been about March.
Mhm.
April, May, February, maybe, we imposed a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum. Okay.
Mhm.
And Trump did a victory lap around that. And US Steel said, thank you, thank you, thank you. The auto companies went up in
Yeah.
arms over it.
Yeah.
And that was one of the reasons why autos got one of the exemptions associated with Canada so that they weren't piling tariff on top of tariff. So,
Mhm.
okay, you're going to have to eat the steel tariff, but now you're not going to have to pay for auto parts coming across that border back and forth between Detroit and Canada, where the auto items are being made, so that we're not compounding tariffs, is the idea.
Mhm.
However, what actually happens? So, you've got US prices here because that's how much it costs to make it. You've got foreign company prices down here because it costs them less to make it, even with shipping. You bring up the tariff, so then that raises the price of the foreign steel above the US steel.
Mhm.
And now everybody wants to buy US steel. So, what does US steel do? They raise their prices as
Yeah.
well to have it happen
Mhm.
so that it's matched. Because if it matches, I'm very happy to support US steel because
Yeah.
it's my hometown, it's my home country, and it doesn't cost me any more money to do so. Right. So, actually, if you look at the data from the time that the 25% got put into, we've seen increases in prices of steel, US steel, not foreign steel. We've also seen foreign steel go
Of
up,
course.
obviously, because of that. Now we're moving it to 50%. That is really interesting. Starting June 4th. So like blink, 3 days from now, it's gonna happen, right?
Oh,
Um yeah,
yeah. So question, will US companies so you're the CEO of US Steel. Are you going to raise prices?
yeah. Why would you not? Right? You
I
have
guess
this huge advantage now. You're gonna be 25% cheaper than everybody else because they have this new tax. So of course, this is a capitalistic society.
I
You of
know.
course
Yeah.
you don't raise it 25%. Now come on, you've got to show your patriotic spirit, right? But you're totally going to raise it. And the thing
Listen,
about it is because you're not selling to the US consumer. You're not
right.
having the issue that Walmart did when they announced that they were gonna pass through some of those tariff items, right? You're selling to Ford and GM and everybody else, and so it's them who are raising the prices on the US consumer.
So so put yourself in Trump's shoes and his goal is to get people to buy US steel.
Yes.
He's not intentionally creating inflation. That he's not doing
No,
that.
there's
Uh,
no reason to.
no. But okay, but we see inflation as a consequence, right? If I can raise my prices, I will. Uh, so what could you do as a leader to encourage them not to raise prices? So and I'm thinking um whether they were going to put a special tariff or penalty or tax on Apple, right? Angry with Apple for increasing the prices, et cetera. So we're going to single them out. When the organization is within your borders, is it higher tax rates on that? Like how can you encourage them as the leader not to raise the prices?
There are lots of different ways, and every single one ends up being communistic or socialistic. They're
Interesting.
they're not capitalistic, right? Capitalism says that the companies run their own business without interfering. We're a free market
Right.
here, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't work. It's everything that you stand against if you are a free market US capitalistic society that's working, because there are lots of different options. You can require a license to sell. You can do what we do to a lot of pharmaceuticals and try to cap pricing, right? You can actually try to impose price caps that are happening. There are different ways you can try. You can say, okay, fine. If you raise your prices, we raise your taxes, and we're going to
Mhm.
take all of that excess profit away from you. And try to discourage them. But if you don't raise your prices, then we will not raise your taxes, and you will,
Yeah.
still be the same either way. So why go through the headache? You can try to put those type of penalties in place. They're all financial. Let's be honest. In the end, everything comes down to the mighty dollar,
Right.
but it's not a good system, and
Yeah.
I do not want to play chicken with Trump, and I
Right.
would
Of
not wanna
course
be
not.
the manager who plays
Right.
chicken with Trump, because while taco sounds like fun, you know, I would not bet on that.
Uh, well, but here's the question: your investors want you to raise your prices.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely, make
I
more money.
yeah, that's a really interesting conundrum, and I think it's the conundrum that most leaders are in right now. Okay, you told me that Biden Biden prevented the sale of U.S. steel, while we're talking about steel, to
Nippon.
Japan,
Yep,
Nippon. Yeah, and I thought that was really interesting. And so when we're thinking about ways that you can prevent company from raising prices, you could regulate the industry.
you could
Hmm.
regulate the industry, and
Well,
that
yeah,
does happen, and, so let's go back a little bit of history with what's happening, because there's some really interesting timing work going on here,
yeah,
right? So, Nippon tried to buy US steel back when Biden was still in power, and they prevented it, with the argument being that in time of crisis, we want to make sure that our manufacturing of steel is here. I mean, that's how we make tanks and guns and rocket launchers and ships, et cetera. We need US to produce its own steel. If you have a foreign company like Japan come in and buy US steel, basically helping buy that customer list, it's going to be the exact same playbook that we see every time we see an M&A, which is, okay, I now have excess capacity in my company. I'm going to shut down the highest price producing factory that I own, and I'm going to service my customers out of a lower price factory. Where's the highest price factory? Right here in the
U.S.
United
Yeah,
States, right? So we want to prevent that from happening. So we stop US steel from being sold to the Japanese company, right? Trump comes into office and he says the exact same thing. He's like, yep, no, no, no. He kept saying no. And Nippon kept coming back and sweetening the deal, trying to get it done because they want US steel. And about what, a day later, he announces the 50% tariffs and he approves Nippon's purchase of US steel almost at the exact same time.
and when you say sweetening the deal, you're not talking about paying more for the company. You're talking about
No,
meeting somebody else's terms.
I'm
And
talking
so,
about meeting requirements of when
mhm,
things are going to operate, what will operate, are jobs protected, can I shut this down, etc. So basically, the Japanese company has made certain assurances to the Trump administration that they get to help decide some of these corporate moves. Basically, we're getting involved. We're regulating this deal. We're going to regulate this particular company because it is now going to be foreign owned.
interesting. And it does make me wonder if some point the U.S. actually gets into the steel business. But I mean, then of course wouldn't be free trade. But that's super interesting. So, so what we saw happen, if I understand, we saw uh, tariffs on steel go to 50%, or they will
Say, well,
in a few days, and then uh, at the same time, our steel will be owned by a foreign country, and that steel, the reason that we sold our steel is because we guarantee that they're not going to take the manufacturing out, and we also know that because the price of steel from outside the country is now 25% higher than the price of steel in the country, right?
yep. Which
So,
brings us back. Let's do it. Bring it back to the circle, right? So,
right.
with brings us back to, in this case, taco can't happen. Trump
Right.
can't chicken out on these tariffs.
Right.
They're
Because if
going
he
to be,
does, they could very, very easily shut down the US deal.
yeah.
Uh, yeah. Well, what are the consequences? What kind of consequences can you have for a foreign company that reneges on their promises, right? That I think is the big thing. There's, I mean, I assume that they have I know other things that they could uh, tariff specifically from this one company.
Yeah, yeah, you could argue that they're going to prevent Nippon from bringing in US steel, just literally
Mhm.
ban it from coming into the United States, forcing them to only service it through the United States, costing them more money and making it just so economically unattractive to do anything that they either basically have to abandon
Mhm.
their US assets or play by our rules. That's probably what's going to happen. Worst comes to worst, you could actually see the United States get into something and actually seize the property or something like that. But that's
Interesting.
way down the road, and that's you're gonna have to go into some conspiracy theory land for that to
We don't
happen.
want to go there. Okay,
We
we
don't.
want to talk about decisions leaders are making it.
Yeah,
So yeah, but
but
okay, so now,
yeah,
um, on a couple days, foreign steel is going to be significantly more expensive than U.S. steel. You're an auto manufacturer. What do you do? Do you believe that U.S. steel is not going to go up by 24%? And so like,
here's I don't think you can rely on the 50% tariffs. Even with the US Steel Nippon argument out there, you
mhm,
don't need 25% to make this work,
okay,
right? You could have a 10% tariff. You could have something else. You just need US steel to be competitive or even slightly cheaper than foreign steel.
right,
Right. So could we see Trump say, okay, we went from 25 to 50. Now we're going to pull back to 30.
right,
That would be in line with what we've seen else happen, right? We went from 0 to 52% tariffs on some random country, and now we're back to 10. It's not that we've eliminated all the tariffs. We're actually higher than we were before the beginning, but it's not as heavy as the punishing tariffs I announced on April 2nd, right?
right.
So if I am a manufacturer or I'm a US consumer, I have to assume my prices are going to go up. Do I worry about the worst case scenario? Maybe, but not necessarily.
Not necessarily. Yeah, it's super interesting. And for those who don't know, that whole strategy is a negotiation tactic called anchoring. So it make you feel better about the 10%. So, but it is a corporate strategy
It is.
in negotiation. So, all
Whew.
right,
All
that,
right. So
that
that's
was
a
really
lot.
interesting.
That
That
is a
is a lot.
lot to deal with. But unfortunately, it's not the only thing to deal with when it comes to the taco trade. So we've kind of got this idea of short term decisions. That's what we're talking about now. Let's move to long term. What do you
Absolutely.
do long term? Do you start shifting your supply chain? Because that's a big deal.
That is. And I think we're seeing it happen already. Corporations have been doing this for a while. They've been diversifying their supply chains. Um, they have especially been diversifying their supply chains away from China because it's just for years it has been less and less appealing. But I think the big concern is now to where so many organizations are bolstering their uh, so many corporations are bolstering their production in India, for example. But India is not immune to these tariffs. Are there any countries that are immune to it? So I don't
The
know.
United States?
Yeah. Which is a very expensive place to
It's
manufacture goods.
you're absolutely right. Let's be honest. Right now, everybody is searching for a safe haven, and there's nothing.
Yeah.
The tariffs have hit our allies, our traditional trade partners, countries that we are on really friendly terms with and not so friendly terms with. There is no place that everybody can go, oh, this is safe. So,
Right.
is this strategy just general diversification? Do I try to make sure I have as many relationships as possible so I can find the cheaper, but not necessarily inexpensive method to go to? that's a real possibility. We're going to see some port shopping. We're going to
Right,
see some people doing the transactions of the first sale, trying to avoid taxes. We're going to have all those wonderful capitalistic moves of trying to avoid as many taxes as possible.
right.
Um, that's going to happen. But I also think we're going to go through some economic pain as a result of
Yeah,
it. And economic pain when prices are going up is a really different than economic pain when prices are stable.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
And
will people tolerate the pain that they're gonna see by paying for their wallets paying with their wallets? So a question for you. All of this is designed to bring manufacturing to the US.
yes,
And we know that manufacturing plants aren't built overnight, and that's part of the issue. But what if companies bring manufacturing back to the US? So let's just play a hypothetical. Because automation is so good right now and AI is rapidly becoming good, why wouldn't I build autonomous factories in the US and just be done with this whole thing?
and that I think is one of the strategies you are starting to see companies do. We had NVIDIA report the other day, and that's
Yep.
exactly what Jensen Wong said was going to happen. Yeah, we're working with people in Dallas, we're working with people in Fort Worth, we're building factories, and in a year, 2 years, 4 years, we're going to have some, chip fabs here in the United States. But he also said the little word of robotic.
Yes, he did.
Autonomous. Those it's not that they're not gonna be new jobs, but the impact of them, the percentage of them that are going to be there is gonna be much smaller than what is going to happen. We go back to the fact that the United States is a service-based economy.
Right.
We're not a manufacturing or an agricultural-based society. It's not that we don't have that, we do. In fact, if you actually look at total manufacturing production in the United States, it
Mhm.
hasn't gone down, it's gone
Interest
up. It's
Interesting.
actually gone up over the past 2
Interesting.
decades, which is interesting, yeah, but the number of jobs in it,
Jobs, yeah. It's
bum,
automation.
bum,
Yeah,
bum, bum, because we've had
yeah.
automation, yeah.
So we bring manufacturing back to the US, which, is nice from a country perspective that we're making things inside our borders. You talked about war, right? But however, the raw materials have to come from somewhere. And if I remember correctly, like we don't have a lot of the rare earth metals needed for like some of the latest technologies. So
Nope, we get those from
we're
China.
still dependent. Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds, and the other thing, if I remember correctly, didn't Elon Musk originally try to build the very first Tesla factory without any humans on the line? I don't know if you remember that, but he
I
couldn't
don't
do it.
remember.
He had to put people back in, but not very many. So
Yeah,
I do think that there will be a period of time where just automation just isn't good enough. But for companies to be
automation's always
competitive,
going to
foreign companies,
need
it's got to be cheap. Yeah.
Yeah, automation's always gonna need mechanics, right? Automation's
Mhm.
always gonna need somebody to watch the line, right?
Right.
So it's not that it's 0 jobs. It's just that it's much fewer jobs than when you had somebody else manually, cranking on that, assembly line by Henry Ford.
Right. Yeah, much different setup for sure.
This is a really interesting kind of case study. It's terrible. It's playing out live, right? So we've got somebody who is trying to fundamentally change a culture of a company, in this case, the
Right,
government, right? I mean, think about anything bureaucracy and you think long and slow. It's the only industry I know that puts academia to shame and how slow it moves.
it does.
That's there. And you come in and you bring in Donald Trump, who says he's going to shake things up. He brings in Elon Musk and the Doge
Mhm.
to try to shake things up. And he is trying to make rapid decisions, make things more agile, get things done quickly. Possibly because, again, presidents have a notoriously short amount of time that they actually get to
Right.
govern before they have to run again. Um, but it's a really interesting idea if you look at it from a management point of view rather than
Absolutely.
from a constituent's point of view.
We're seeing some of that play out, for sure. Not only, well, I would say mostly through the media, because that's where we get all of our information is through the media. But uh, he's moving fast enough that he's catching his own advisors off guard. And I think that's where we really turn a potential agile situation into a dangerous situation, because the last thing you want is for one of your direct reports to contradict you in public and wash away any credibility that you may have had. But the other thing is, when you move at that speed without communicating your why, and that's what I'm seeing a lot of lack in. If you Even if you just assume that everything that he's doing is altruistic for the US, and I believe that he thinks he's making every move positive for the US, there's going to be a subset of your organization that was supporting you but does not see the positive of every single move. Like one move, maybe I'm in auto manufacturing, maybe I'm losing my job because the price of our supplies are going up. Now I turn bitter. If you had explained the why of that decision and your end goal, it's easier for me to continue supporting you. And so I think that's what I see from a speed and agility versus uh, impact on your organization or your country. You can move really, really fast, but when you do, actually, a leader told me this about myself. When you get too far out in front of the troops, you start looking like the enemy and you get shot. And that was like that. You want to fire your boss because they're not explaining why they're doing what they're doing. So I think that's we're seeing a great management lesson play out here.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating to see what happens and how long this can happen before things really blow up. We've seen wave after wave of almost scandal come
Mhm.
out so far, because decisions have been made that have been poor. Whether it's middle management stuff happening, that has caused issues, or whether it's upper management because of Trump himself. But it's also been his subordinates who have come out and stuck their foot deep in their mouths a couple of different times, or saying a different story, et cetera. But it all rolls up to the CEO. That's happening. There are different things at play, obviously, in a government, but in the end, you go back to it, and that is you have to trust your manager.
Right. Yeah, you got to. Yeah, I totally agree.
And I don't know how long we're going to see trust, right? I don't
Right.
know. The government is alienating, quote unquote, customers or other countries. It's alienating its employees, and we'll see what happens. But from a management point of view, this shift towards attempt to be agile, attempt to be a little authoritarian in the management style, rather than say a servant leader,
Right.
that we're
Yeah.
seeing. Um, we're not seeing a lot of that type of leadership out of White House, but it works. I can't tell you. Every leadership
Yeah.
style is there because for somebody somewhere at some time it worked.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, we'll see the consequences of this. I'm going to pause for just a second. I had another. I was going to ask you from a corporate perspective. I was thinking about like people who do we want to talk about the U.S. companies that are pausing, being at all concerned about global competition. But I don't know. Global competitors have the exact same problem that U.S. companies have because they don't know if the U.S. is a market for them. Or
They do. You're right. You are right. It makes it's really interesting. We are looking at this all from a shift
U.S.
in who are
Yeah.
we getting our supplies from, right? Because let's
Yeah.
be honest, we are net importers. Interestingly enough, if you go overseas and you start looking at that, then you start saying, okay, who are my customers?
Right.
What an interesting argument to be making, right? What an
Yeah.
interesting nuance to have happen. Because while we do ship a lot of services out, we don't ship a lot of product out. So it
Yeah.
is an interesting argument. Like, am I going to lose my major customer? Am I going to lose my major source of revenue, because I don't have access to the US market? Or if I do, I have it at such a reduced scale that I'm going to be impacting everybody else. That's the power Trump holds, right? That's the
Right.
whole point. Is the
Yeah.
American consumer is the ultimate consumer. We spend and waste money like there's nothing, and we get to do
Absolutely.
it
Yeah.
in the almighty dollar.
That's right. Yes, exactly right. And maybe in the future it'll be in the almighty crypto.
Mhm.
We'll see.
No comment.
Okay. So if we try to wrap this whole thing up and bring it back to the taco shape, Jane, like we know that, and when we say markets go down, I mean, we're just saying the prices of stocks go down, right? And so there are
Mhm.
people selling off everything when these trades are announced, and they're buying them back when trades are rescinded or postponed, right? So what does that mean for uh, deciding on tariffs or when to buy a company? Like I think it applies to every purchase, whether it be supplies or companies, right?
Yeah. I don't think you can rely on it, right? You don't want to guess when this is going to stop working, and that's the problem. So the whole back we go back to basic finance, which is the efficient market hypothesis. It just once everybody knows something, it doesn't work anymore,
Right.
and so you get this big U. That's the argument. So go ahead if it's starting to drop, go ahead and hold because it's going to come back. That's the argument of the taco trade. Or as soon as it's announced, go ahead and short it, enjoy the ride
Short
down,
sale. Yeah.
but then very quickly buy it back because you know it's going to come back, right? If you're trying to exploit and get the most money out of it. You don't want to do that with a company. You don't play it like you play the illiquid market, right? You
Mhm.
can't be that nimble. So instead, it's a wait and see. Wait and see. The taco trade is telling you just write it out. It's going to suck for a week, 2 weeks, however long that bottom part is, but it's going to come back because
Yeah.
in the end, we're not going to be as bad as what is announced. So
So
that I think is the takeaway, right?
yeah, absolutely. And I've been talking with some folks in regulated industries. So, and we know there are industries that are regulated for our own benefit or our own reasons,
Utilities.
right? Exactly. Yeah. Or anything that might deal with our health and safety.
Yeah.
So I've been talking with a few folks in regulated industries who also have to innovate. And a lot of them are saying, well, by the time I get this idea complete and it goes through all the testing and it goes to manufacturing, there will be a new administration, and so they're delaying their innovation. And so I think it'd be super interesting. What is delaying our own innovation? What does that impact have on our global competitiveness?
I think the answer is it's not good, right? I mean, we go back again to what NVIDIA said, which is you preventing me from selling to China has not stopped China from continuing to innovate.
Right.
Instead, you've just prevented us from being the basis of all of their product, right? You're making it a disadvantage to us without really penalizing them. The question
But
becomes, are these tariffs going to do the same thing?
right. And I would just say, if you're a business leader out there, it is safer from a job perspective. It's safer. You're more likely to retain your job if you delayed the decision than if you make a decision and it hits the headlines. I think that's where the boat we're in right now is I don't want to show up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. So I'm just going to wait.
Keep your head down, keep your mouth shut, and just see what happens.
Right.
That is probably the actual lesson of the taco trade.
Absolutely. Very good.
Not
What's
not one I really want to play out though.
yeah, no, I agree. I agree. Uh Thank you everybody for listening. Please, if you enjoyed this episode, like it, subscribe, comment, do all of the social media type things. And if you have ideas or questions about decisions that leaders are making, share them with us.
All right. Thanks so much, Cindy.